Welcome to the Academy of Esports Podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. I have the immense pleasure today to welcome Erin Ashley Simon to the podcast. Now, Erin is a multimedia personality. She is a host, she's a producer, and a consultant in esports and culture, and she's been tapped by well-known brands and organizations such as AT&T, eMLS, Gen.G, the Wall Street Journal, University of Kentucky, REVOLT TV, Cycle Media, Box of Mess, Wildcat soccer player, and former Rutgers as well, too. Don't think I didn't read all this stuff. Erin, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And oh my gosh, yeah, it's crazy when you said all that, because it's like, wow, I've done and been a part of a lot.
You have, and I think it's really important to highlight all of those things, because your background is, while you are a gamer, your gaming career started, and you've been a lifelong gamer is my understanding, but your gaming career has not been your primary step into what is now your foray into the esports industry. You've taken a completely different path than a lot of other people have. And I think it's important for educators to know your story, and when they're talking to their students, and for students who may be listening to this, to realize that you don't have to be that hardcore Call of Duty gamer in order to step into the multimedia side, which you have. So first off, let's kind of talk about where you came from and how you got to where you are right now. So what is your gaming background, and how did you find yourself coming into esports?
So funny enough, just like some of my other friends and counterparts in this industry, it just happened. It wasn't anything I planned for, because growing up, esports was not a career route. We didn't think like, hey, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get this degree so I can get a job in esports. That's not something that we thought of. It's more prevalent now. And within the last few years, especially when it comes to a broadcast perspective, there have been people that have covered the scene, but major media entities weren't picking up on it. So it wasn't like I planned for this. And to be honest, I didn't even plan to be a broadcaster. My original major was a Bachelor of Science in journalism, and I was a print and digital journalist, and I minored in business management. And so I was more so of a writer per se. I wasn't like the greatest writer, but that's something that I was always passionate about, is just getting better at writing. I was solid at writing and telling people stories. And so I started when I was younger, when I had my own blog, when I was 16, 17 years old. I covered traditional sports, more specifically high school basketball. And then from there, I started to that was back during the time where people didn't fully understand the capabilities of social media. And so like I was able to message certain people on like Facebook, that now if you try to message them, that it would not work, but like execs at or broadcasters at ESPN, or just all these, like I literally would just DM them on Facebook, like, hey, I'd love to chat with you, get to, learn more about what you do. And eventually those people became my mentors. And from there, I was a top soccer player in New Jersey. I was very competitive. I went on to play at the University of Kentucky, also 1 year at Rutgers University. And so I was constantly, there's only three things. Well, aside from education and getting good grades, I played soccer. I interned and did work in terms of writing for blogs and stuff, or I was playing video games. That's pretty much what I was only able to do, because I was constantly traveling for soccer. Literally, I would only get 3 weeks off out of the year. And even those 3 weeks, I had to still train. And so, because when you went from high school competition, then you had your team, and then you also had a region team, or a state team, or a tournament overseas. It was just a lot. And so I, originally, and it's funny because I think that my career path has changed probably like 3-4 times since high school. I originally wanted to do kinesiology, and that was something I loved, just understanding human body and movements. I wanted to do kinesiology and also psychology, just because I wanted to be someone who was able to help athletes. I went through periods of times where, I relied on therapy, or I had to rely on physical therapy. And it was a struggle at certain times. And I wanted to be someone that can help other athletes, especially me being someone who's play at a high competitive level, how I could help them. And then, but then I was just so intrigued about people's stories and who they were, and just, I was able to get exclusive information, just talking to these high school players and just other people. And then eventually, in college, I had, as part of my internship, I interned for the local newspaper, and it just so happened that some of the stories I had to cover was like a murder case. And then I also had to, it was crazy. Like one of the first early stories I had to work on.
How old were you did that?
I was like, what was it, like 17? No. I wasn't, no, not for that one. For this one, I was maybe like 21, 22, around there. But even still, it was just like, it was crazy because I started my first week and they're like, yeah, we got to have you do a murder case. So they taught me how to how to get files out on people, all this stuff. And then there was a noticeable number increase in terms of suicides in Kentucky. So I had to cover that story. And it was such a good experience because they weren't treating me as if I was like, okay, you're young, you got to take it easy, but then I want to be challenged. And so they put me on these stories with some other people to build these stories up. And then from there, then I covered traditional sports. And then I was like, okay, I may want to do music media. Then I moved to music media. And that's when I was part of the social media team. I worked for Diddy's television network, became a producer over there. So I learned how to be a producer and how to do certain technical stuff there, as well as was a producer for another company called Cycle. I was part of the content development team. And I created one of the series there that was very successful at the time. And I had to do everything pretty much. And then with that, I just naturally fell into esports. I started writing about culture and gaming. Because my friend Kyle Harvey, I always give him credit to this day. Like him and I worked with each other at this sports media company. And we would always talk about gaming and culture. And he was like, why don't you stop talking about it and start writing about it? And I'm like, you know what? That's a smart idea. So I did that, covered the NBA 2K League. Then eventually my friend Jeff Eisenband, they needed someone to host a show with him. He brought me up. They brought me in. And that was the beginning of my broadcast work, especially in the esports scene and just in general. So a lot of it has just been me capitalizing on opportunities when I got those opportunities, and then constantly growing and constantly learning and constantly adjusting.
And I think that's great that you highlighted too, through all of this that you highlighted, you have mentioned mentors, like several different layers of mentors through your life. And I know with our esports program here in Racine, Wisconsin, one of the things we did this year was we had the press, local press, come to us and say, we would really love to cover your esports, because every time we run a story, we get ad hits, every time there's an esports story on our website. But our reporters don't know anything about esports. Can you help us? I said, I have a bunch of kids who could probably tell you everything that you need to know about esports. They'll tell you about events. They'll give you breakdowns. And so our teams all had press secretaries, and our Overwatch season was covered with our press secretaries working with reporters. So it's stories like that, again, where you're talking about the mentorship and the importance of that through your career. And I can see that as you've been stepping into your esports role, that mentorship is really, you're doing it, but you've got great people, it sounds like, around you too, helping you as you make this journey in your life.
Yeah. I mean, I've had various people help me along the way. I think that, and for me, just how I went about it, it's always about me constantly learning. It's even to this day, I wear it as a badge of honor. I'm such a super nerd. I love to constantly learn. I love to constantly get better. And I've always been someone that's watches other people to improve on the things that I need to do better. And I would always watch someone who is better than me to get better. The same way that when I was an athlete, I watched soccer, I watched other competitors, I watched teams that we were going to compete against and watch how they moved and how they played. That's how I got better. I treat the same way that I treated soccer is the same way that I treat my career, in the sense of I want to be the best. I want to be the great. But I understand that there's practice, there's effort, there's coaching, and that coaching is mentorship. There's and failure. Yes. And failing. That's another thing too. And then also, there's the intent, there's teamwork, there are, even the negatives in terms of people telling you can't do something, or you're not a good enough player, and realizing yourself and having the confidence in yourself saying I am, and proving them wrong. The same thing has happened in my career. And mentorship has been so instrumental because mentorship has guided me towards where I need to go. I think the most important thing that students have to understand is that when it comes to mentorships, you still have to put in the work. You still have to do things in order to progress yourself, whether it's personally or career-wise. The mentorships are just there to kind of say, hey, instead of going right, make a left. You should try this. Why don't you talk to this person? At the end of the day, like, you have to sell yourself, and you have to still do. That's the thing that people have to understand, or I guess kids have to understand with mentorships, is like, the mentors are not going to tell you everything. They're not going to give you the answers to everything, because their journey is different from yours. You're going to have to find some of the answers yourself. The mentors are just there to kind of guide you along the way with any circumstances or situations that they've been through already, and they can kind of work you through it to get you where you need to go.
And that's actually the point that you bring up about the mentorship and the pathway. I interviewed Connor Alney from Ottawa University last week, and that was something he said, hey, as he was telling his story, he's like, this story is mine, and the story is going to be very different for a kid who's starting off right now, because the landscape was very different. The esports landscape was very different. There wasn't big events and big prize money and things like that. But your point about mentorship kind of segues us into the next point, because today, and I love that I had you booked for today, and it's like, this is the perfect thing. The NCAA made some recommendations referring to how student athletes, we call them in my school district, we call them scholar gamers, but how student athletes can start to use their likeness and profit from their likeness. And the tweets that you put out today, I think, were very powerful. And in my perspective as a K-12 administrator, I see mentorship even being more important right now for kids, especially those, because again, the NCAA has kind of been dancing around esports. What are they going to do with it? And my take has always been, once the NCAA figures out how to make $1 off of it, then they'll jump in. But with this, it feels like this is where mentorship is even more important right now. Whether you are a student athlete or whether you're a scholar gamer, the NCAA recommendations right now open a door for esports, and I think esports has kind of even pushed the NCAA in some of these recommendations and changes. But again, there's huge issues right now of inclusion that you see and I see. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and what you've seen?
Yeah, of course. I think that the most important thing, because like it's funny, when I brought up that article and I posted in LinkedIn, I think a lot of people were focusing on the fact that, like, oh, NCAA said they're not going to even try to get involved, or the NCAA will try to ruin it, and esports programs have already been created, and the NCAA is not needed. And I think that that's like that wasn't even necessarily the point. I think that the most important thing that people have to understand from how the athletic programs are set up, the universities themselves do not want to get fined or in trouble with the NCAA. So they're going to do as much as they can to protect their main profit teams, which are football and basketball, before they do anything else. This rule will help them with, one, retaining players, because that's the conversation that's been happening, is like, okay, well, why should kids go to college when they can go to the G League, they can go to overseas and do these other programs and actually earn money? And so maybe this will help to retain certain players, just because the NBA has been talking about allowing kids to go from high school to the pro scene, right? And so with this, though, I said, it's less about NCAA being involved in the esports scene, because the esports scene is growing, but it's still not quite there. And this ruling will make universities be more comfortable with supporting their esports programs, because there will be less of a fear of the NCAA cracking down on them, because typically esports and gamers are probably making money before they even get to their school. Possibly, if they're content creators and they've already been playing competitively, they made money in some way. So they're I
don't mean to stop you, but I think it's important to highlight. I mean, there's probably football players and basketball players who are looking at those kids who win Fortnite tournaments, Call of Duty tournaments. They go, how come they get $30,000? And I have to sit here and struggle on Saturdays and Sundays when to eat. And I have to figure out, I can't take a job during the summer, but these kids are still able to compete on teams at our school. And, I mean, the football and basketball players have to start, and all athletes on scholarship have to be looking around going, where's the equity? Where's the fairness in this? Where does this help me out? Why should I stay here? And I think that's to your point, right?
Yeah. And I think another thing with that too is that, it's very complex issues, because I also see that there's the one side, there's a traditional sports side that doesn't quite understand esports. And actually in this instance, I feel like esports doesn't understand the infrastructure of traditional sports. Because, with this, like I said, the main focal point that I was just hearing was just NCAA's involvement in esports and they don't need them. But that's not the point. The point is that with this ruling, it become more comfortable with supporting esports and supporting the programs financially, or even making them an actual certified athletic program. And with that, they're able to allocate some finances to help with scholarship opportunities or even equipment. And another thing too, with that, they are able to do more, right? For example, the University of Kentucky, my alma mater, is associated with Gen.G. Now with this ruling, and if the esports team becomes an official athletic program, they can make money on the side and they can get additional revenue from competing as well. That can help to build the program. And by bringing more resources and finances, you can recruit more kids, and you can recruit more kids who come from low income areas. I mean, that's why we see with traditional sports how, there are various kids from basketball and football, or even just some other sports that are from low income areas. But because they have enough revenue, they can bring those kids in. And that's the problem with esports right now. I feel like it still has barrier to entry. Yes. You need PCs, right? Not every kid has a PC, and even with that, kids who predominantly play console, they're people of color, and some of them just don't have internet access or bad internet. There's so many. It's such a complex issue, and I think that having this ability where kids can make money not only can help them from even some of the top players that I went to UK, and everyone thinks that like because you're an athlete, right, you instantly get all this money, you get supported every single way, and that's just not true. And I've even had some student athlete friends who struggled and their families were struggling, right? And so that also will support and help that kid. If he can make some money and give some money back to his family, that's one less thing that he has to worry about. If he's competing in an esports tournament and it's a college esports tournament and they can get like $50,000 or whatever and split it across, and that's money that he can help bring back to his family, and it eases his mind or her mind a lot more. It's a very multi-layered thing, and I think that having this ability will allow the universities to support the esports programs a lot more. It will allow the esports the kids in the esports program to make some additional money, or if they were content creators before, still be able to do content creation, still be able to stream and go to school as well. And it will diversify the talent pool. When finances become a problem, it can restrict the talent pool. I mean, we've seen that with sports in the U.S. For example, soccer is so expensive in the U.S. and it shouldn't be. Some of the top athletes or top soccer players in the world come from impoverished or low income areas, or just a middle class. If we create these opportunities or create this better financial infrastructure and support for the esports program, it will allow them to tap into more demos, more areas, and get more assistance to grow their program. And I feel like universities will be more not afraid with the fact that this ruling will kind of lessen some of the restrictions and lessen some of the pressure that NCAA puts on schools. And they do. I mean, they're harder on certain schools more than others, to be honest.
And I feel like we have started, at least in the K-12 realm, we have started to move forward with making access to esports more of a level playing field. As more high schools start to get into it, I know in my community of Racine, where about 30% of our families don't have internet access. They don't have consoles or PCs at home. This is the only way that they can play. We have now 5 high school teams here who compete. Of course, now with COVID-19 and the realities, I have basically an entire team of kids who have disappeared off the face of the earth. I mean, they're still around, but the issues of inequity of access is now rearing its ugly head in the age of COVID. The issue of that esports and the access to college now, especially as you're saying with this NCAA ruling, the access to esports at a K-12 level now becomes even more of a social justice issue in a lot of ways, access to higher education. So what have you seen since COVID-19 has happened, and people keep I keep seeing the esports community is thriving. The esports community is thriving. For whom is the esports community really thriving? I mean, I guess that's the big question. Is it truly thriving, or is it thriving in ways where money's coming in, but it's not necessarily being inclusive and bringing everybody in?
I mean, it's so important that people have to understand that like esports has been affected just like every other industry, and in some aspects of the industry, the esports industry, it's been impacted super like heavily. And I think that with what we're seeing, like content wise, I would say that people think that because there's adjustment that we see in the competitive scene and traditional sports picking it up and then more athletes playing and more celebrities playing, that it's thriving. When I feel like it's just more of an adjustment. I feel like in some ways it's thriving in the sense of there's more respect and there's more attention on it because it's one of the only things that people can put attention on right now. But you know, I wouldn't necessarily jump to say like financially in this way, like certain parts of brands and non-endemic brands are involved in the scene who put the money in have been impacted, and some haven't been impacted at all. I think that it's just the attention level and the impressions that esports is getting is exponentially going a lot faster, and it's more than probably what would happen if COVID-19 didn't happen. And I think that another thing too is there's always been an inclusion, and there's also still an accessibility issue in esports. Like the fact that there's such a focus, and it's funny because I had a whole call and talk to my friend about this, about how the esports infrastructure, it's set up on PCs and PC systems and gaming. But the problem is that there are certain demographics that probably cannot afford those PCs. We don't like this. It's very much different. Like, you know, like think about it like this, like if LeBron James was an esports gamer, he probably wouldn't even be able to compete starting out just because he's from a low income area. Right. And he's one of the greatest athletes. And so I feel like the esports community, we're doing a disservice to ourselves because there's that accessibility and that financial barrier to entry bit difficult for certain communities, certain people too, especially the underserved community. That's also why I love the FGC, and I'm hoping that the FGC will get more financial support because with that, you know, console gaming, it's so diverse, that community. There's people from all different walks of life. And go ahead.
Just to help the teacher who may be listening, because again, they don't know all the terms. FGC, fighting game community. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure that they knew that. Okay, go on. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. So FGC is sorry, I'm still in my like complete gamer mode right now after I did a stream with ESPN. It's the fighting game community, and in this community they compete playing Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, and another fighting game titles. Yeah, Smash Brothers, Eunice, all that. And so that community is actually very diverse, and you see that, you know, there are quite a lot of Black professional gamers, Latin, trans, Asian, and more. And so the accessibility obviously to console allows for there to be more and differing competitors, right? But then when you look at CSGO, right? You look at CSGO and they are predominantly white, you know? You see certain other industries, competitive scenes that are predominantly white players and Asian players. And I always say it's important to note that there's nothing wrong with that, and there's not a problem with that. I think the lack of diverse representation is the problem, and part of it goes back to accessibility and financial access and certain barriers to entries that still have to be fixed. Because right now, and I don't like this term. So there's this term called PCs. They say PCs master race.
Yep, master race.
I don't like that term.
And console peasants. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't like that because predominantly when it comes to consoles, you see a lot more Black and Latin community members who play that. And then for PCs, even though PC is all across the board, but if you look at the competitive scene, a lot of the players, like I said, they're white or they're Asian. And so you're already splitting up this demographic unintentionally by utilizing that phrase. And so I never liked it. And I feel like there are some racial undertones to that. But also it highlights such a disparity that we have in this industry that needs to be fixed. And it's a complex issue. It's not going to be solved overnight. But the best thing that we can do to kind of help get to that point is going back to resources, accessibility, and financial support and figuring out where can we do that, where can we highlight, where can we be a part of event, upcoming event that we have with community, where you're able to provide able to provide certain resources. You're able to help provide a more clear-cut internship opportunities, scholarship opportunities, creating multiple different access routes that people can enter into the scene. It doesn't have to be as pro players. They can come work for a team. They could be able to get a scholarship to a college, become a doctor, and then they can be a doctor that caters towards esports gamers. I think there's so many different ways. There's so many different ways to get into the scene, but we have to create these entry points and better entry points for the youth.
And again, you bring up some excellent points. And I interviewed LaToya Peterson. She did a fantastic story for The Undefeated called "Why Aren't More Black Kids Going Pro?" And she highlighted a lot of what you're talking about. And what's amazing is you look at the demographics of who is watching esports events, and it pretty much cuts across America. If you look at America, the demographics we're talking is roughly 48% white, and then you're talking 22% African American Latino is around 22%, and then you have other in 10%, which is probably going to be mostly Asian populations. And what's amazing is that who's watching esports almost matches up the demographics of our country as a cross section, almost identical. It's just the participants are very different. And in a lot of the things that you brought up, the access to console gaming, the perception of what console gaming is in this country, I think it does need a rethink because gaming on consoles, I can tell you, is that it's just as it can be just as competitive, just as rich, just as hard, just as stylish, just as fun as what you do on a PC. And I just again, I really struggle again with my own community and seeing my own kids who are struggling right now and saying, what do we need to, and you're talking about what do we have to do to get down to fix this? And you're talking access, we're talking inclusion. I'm guessing you're going to say too that schools have to get involved at some point. I mean, to grow this. I mean, we don't just all of a sudden we just don't do kids show up at college and esports with scholarships. I mean, how do they get exposure? How do they get teamwork? How do they do all these things? So there's so many levels and layers to this, and I really appreciate all your insights. I have a couple other questions, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about. You did talk about in the beginning of this. You talked about your 2K experience. We have the Milwaukee Bucks near here. I have a really good working relationship with Andrew Buck, who heads up the Milwaukee Bucks 2K team. But I got to ask you, and this is a serious question: why hasn't NBA 2K really just taken off? Like to me, it's been around now for it's coming up on its third season, and I know COVID has kind of put a stop on things. But does it feel like 2K has kind of just it's reached a point, but it's kind of stopped, and it's kind of throbbing right here and kind of sitting below the surface? What's going on with 2K in your perspective?
Well, I mean, 2K as a series itself live can't compete with it. I mean, we'll keep it a buck right there. And I think that in terms of user base, casual user base, it's pretty solid. And even like their user base over in China for their online ability is actually solid. I just think that when it comes to, if we're talking even more about the competitive scene of 2K, it's about them figuring out, one, how to translate it over. Because typically a casual 2K gamer, when they play, if they play with one specific player, they'll be like in the park. But there are some 2K casual gamers who will play with a whole team, and they're running the whole 5-man team. That's not the same for the 2K league, where you're doing it. If you're a point guard, you're only you're going to be playing a point guard, shooting guard, all that stuff. And it's like finding a way to translate that over. I think another thing too is what they've done a better job at the league is that at first, when they started out with the 2K league, it was predominantly run by NBA personnel. You have to integrate certain people from the community. They started to do that. They brought one of my friends over, Black Frank White. Several of the coaches are actually like very, very known 2K community members. They've been finding ways to develop programs. Like they have a women development camp. They've also been doing some other things to kind of just start bringing more people in. And I think that it's also a little bit harder for traditional sports because when traditional sports-based video games, it's a little bit hard for them to translate some of the fans over because something, it's not a same visual experience like an NBA fan. It's not the same visual experience as watching 2K League. But I think that during this time, I think traditional sports games are the ones that are really getting a lot more of the attention because ESPN, they do have a Madden programming now.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of 2K competitions, even FIFA, because at the end of the day, it's sports. And there are ways that it can translate those sports fans over to still enjoy the sport, but in a virtual capacity. But it may not be exactly what they're used to, but it's something that they're craving and that they want. But the one that's been doing tremendous, obviously, is iRacing. But
Yes.
iRacing has been doing so well because the simulator capabilities of iRacing is actually there's very much a lot more crossover to real life racing. And there's even been some people who've done simulation racing and have gone pro after. And so that's why there's a little bit of difference. And you've seen some of the pro players that have been struggling doing iRacing. But I like that though. I like that though, because people always assume, oh, racing or gaming, it's easy. And then you see these actually pro athletes struggle. I love it because then it shows that, no, it's a different level of technique and abilities that you need. The same way that doing real life racing is a different technique and ability you need to do that versus me driving down to Walmart or something like that. So it's really cool that we're starting to see that. And I think that they've been struggling to have that translation. But I think even now more during this period of time, it should make it even easier for them to translate the traditional sports fans and more of the 2K casual gamers over, considering there's no other sport really going on right now.
One last thing, coming up this weekend,
Yes.
there is a major event that is going to actually help historically Black college and universities, as well as underserved K-12 school districts with access to technology. Would you care to talk about that event real quickly?
Yes. So Tech for COVID is an amazing event that I'm going to be part of, and I'm actually going to be streaming for 2 hours for it. And it's super, super amazing what the community and communities and organizations and nonprofit organization, what they're doing, as well as HBCU and to raise awareness and funds for underrepresented K through 12 institutions and HBCU student athletes who don't have access to adequate laptops. And basically, it's to help and assist with resources. It has myself, Kevin Ware, we have Desi Banks, Offset, Jeezy, Cedric the Entertainer, Cheryl Swoops, and many more. And I think the most important thing is that we're coming together to help. I think that, if you aren't very aware of historically Black colleges and universities, they typically, the financial support that these universities get is not always the same as a Penn State or a Stanford or certain state schools. And so there are limitations, especially and there are kids who go to these universities and they're from low income areas and they are overall part of the underrepresented community. So with that, some of these kids can't even do regular college courses because they don't have laptops or they don't have the appropriate internet access or don't have internet access at all at home. Mm-hmm. So, it's important that we're able to help raise not only awareness and money for it, because ultimately, we don't want them to be held back from education and held back and at a disadvantage from learning because of this, right? And no one expected for us to have COVID-19 happen. And so what are some ways that we can help alleviate some of the stress and pressures and then also help these kids further advance in their schooling and further help with their circumstances right now? Because it's a tough time. It's definitely a tough time. So I'm going to be streaming for 2 hours. I believe I'll be streaming for 2 hours on Saturday. It goes Saturday and Sunday. And yeah, I'm just going to be playing. I don't know where I'm going to play yet. I got to figure that out. It's funny. Everyone's like, are you going to end up playing Call of Duty? Probably going to end up playing Call of Duty, but that's okay. But yeah, it's just, it's for a good cause. And also it's important for us to also have some fun, and it doesn't hurt to have fun while raising awareness for such an important thing.
And you also have your podcast as well too, that you're regularly doing right now, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's called podcast, and essentially we really touch
say it
on
again
some
because we paused out for a second. Say that again because you paused out right at the beginning. Got to get the word out.
Oh yes. Oh man, so yeah, the podcast that I have with my friends, it's called Grassroots Podcast. Roots is spelled like routes, but it's pronounced roots. It's a play on word. And with this podcast, my friends and I, we talk about a lot of not only cultural things like hip hop, sports. We also talk about very big social issues and certain things and certain topics for example, we're talking about Kanye West becoming a billionaire as a Black man, and my other hosts, they're Black men, and just having them talk about what that means for them. How does that motivate them? How can we increase generational wealth for our youth so that there will be more people of color who are billionaires? And so just deeper conversations about that we'd like to have. And on top of that, we talk about gaming. So we like to talk about just things that are meaningful to us, and we hope that people enjoy those conversations.
Fantastic. So, and I just want to make sure it says I think this is a great, I guess, title or a great headline for you too, because I don't think people realize this. And I love this. This was an article by Forbes, and they said the future of esports storytelling is a Black Latin woman. And I think that was a fantastic way to describe it. You truly are a storyteller. You truly are somebody who is out there making a difference and putting a unique and new and important perspective on esports that's been missing. Erin Ashley Simon, thank you so much for being on the Academy of Esports podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're clear. That's it. That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.